The battle between incumbent Democrat Scott Peters and Republican challenger Caro DeMaio for Congress is nasty and expensive. It's also anything but dull. The issues have been shoved out of the picture by lurid charges of sexual harassment, vandalism, and theft. Plus, the 4-year drought has spawned a $7.5 billion water bond. Will it really help? I'm Mark Sauer, and the KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome. It's Friday, October 24th. I'm Mark Sauer. And joining me at the Roundtable today are KPBS Enterprise reporter Claire Tregesser. Hi, Claire.
Hi, Mark. Tony
Perry, San Diego Bureau Chief for the Los Angeles Times. Hi, Tony.
Hi, Mark.
And KPBS Business and Environment reporter Eric Anderson. Good to see you, Eric.
Good to see you, Mark.
Well, the battle between incumbent Democrat Scott Peters and Republican challenger Caro DeMaio for Congress is nasty, expensive, and anything but dull. This race for California's 52nd district has drawn national attention because it's one of the very few congressional races in play. And then there are the unique elements to this story: allegations of sexual harassment, purloined political documents, a burglary, vandalism, and threats all swirling about the DeMaio campaign. Tony, let's start with a confrontation you had a little while ago at a press conference Mr. DeMaio called. This was a press conference for his putting his political message out forward, and you kind of confronted him there.
Well, he said, are there any questions? And I had a question. The question was, had he been interviewed by sex crimes detectives from San Diego Police Department about allegations that he had made inappropriate sexual advances on a former staff member and had masturbated in front of him and had offered him $50,000 to stay quiet. Not true, he said. Furthermore, that fellow only makes up these allegations because he got fired, and he's also a suspect in a burglary of our office.
Okay.
And that began it all.
That began it all. All right. Now, it is a very complicated story and a chronology. Let's start back on May 12th. Before the primary, there were these charges of plagiarism involving the DeMaio campaign. And what happened then, and how did the candidate handle it?
Well, part of the campaign was Carl asserting some financial issues were, as he said they were, and it turns out the report wasn't his, but rather a staff member had taken it from somewhere. It was a National Journal.
A pension double-dipping report.
One of Carl's issues. And he got caught real quick. National Journal kicked back, and the rest of us wrote a little bit about it. Initially he said, I don't throw staff members under the bus, and he didn't. But then a few weeks later, if you believe everything, his office was burglarized, and the police came out and checked it out. And then one thing and another, we learned ultimately that he had fired a staff member, or a staff member had quit, depending on whose version you believe. And Carl was pointing towards that staff member, 28 years old, as the person who burglarized the office. So the cops were involved, looking at the sex allegations and at the burglary.
All right. So this fellow we're talking about, of course, is Todd Bosnich. Now, what do we know about him, Claire?
So he's worked with the campaign since October, I believe, and was just one of the campaign staffers. Now, he says, I think they both, DeMaio and Bosnich, say that he was fired. It's just for different reasons. DeMaio says Bosnich was fired for plagiarism, for plagiarizing that report. Bosnich said he was fired because he confronted DeMaio about this alleged sexual misconduct, and he was fired the next day because the campaign manager said, you know, Carl has lost trust on you.
Okay.
In you.
And these allegations, we touched on them. You gave us the points of them, but the details are, I mean, they're very serious here.
Very serious. And when I attempted to quiz Carl DeMaio at the press conference about it, he said that the police chief, Shelley Zimmerman, had called him in August and said, we looked into the sex allegations, and there's nothing there. You're all clear. She would not comment when we all called the police department, and that's where it stood. Also, the district attorney would not comment about any report that had come over from the police department on either the sex allegations or the burglary allegations. And that's where it stood until earlier last week, in which the DA and the police chief simultaneously came out and said that the district attorney has decided there's no criminal charges because of insufficient evidence on either case. Now, neither the police chief nor the district attorney has been willing to answer questions. In fact, they both fled when confronted by a reporter from Voice of San Diego. Not a high point of of clarity and transparency in public officialdom, I'm afraid, in San Diego, but they did. So all we have is some written statements. So we don't know, did Shelley Zimmerman call Carl DeMaio in August, as he says? And if so, what did she say? We don't know.
Doesn't it seem a little odd if you're investigating someone that you would call ahead of time before you turned it over to the prosecutor in this case?
Does seem, although having been a former San Diego City Council member, maybe he got considerations. He said that she called to say thank you for cooperating because he and his staff apparently were willing to be interviewed. They didn't lawyer up, at least at that point. And in that context, he said that she cleared him, basically.
Now, the chief's statement said we maintained utmost confidentiality throughout the entire thing. And when reporters were asking the police spokesman, did she call? He said, read the statement line by line. So one could infer her saying we maintained confidentiality might mean, no, I didn't call, I was maintaining confidentiality.
Of course, it's over now, in theory. I don't see criminal charges on either of them. One would think.
Although Bosnich's lawyer says they are going through with a civil lawsuit.
Well, let me a couple other things I want to flesh out a little bit there. One other aspect of the sexual allegations that Bosnich has made, and of course this could be talked about as a workplace issue, an HR type issue, State Employment Commission issue, except there's the bribe there. He says that he was offered $50,000 in hush money not to come forward with this. That's what Bosnich says, right?
But
would that not elevate it to a criminal
level? When I
level?
talked to Bosnich at some length before any stories were out, he said that the police had, who he was very complimentary of, he said the police had told him these are very difficult cases because they come down to conversations between just two people.
Private conversation.
Right.
What he said, she said, or in this case he said, and very hard to prove. So I think we were being primed for the fact that on the sex stuff, there was not going to be a criminal charge. As for the buying silence, well, when a lot of people leave employment, they're made to sign, if they care for a severance, a non-disclosure, non-disparagement. So I'm not sure that
maybe that
was very strong.
Although $50,000 sounds higher than.
Although it does go back to how much money does Carl have, and if so, where did it come from? Carl's past is a bit mysterious. There's been some reporting, but not a lot. So we really don't know how much money Carl does have, and where did it come from?
Eric, you looked like you had a question a moment ago.
I've thought about this case, over the past couple of days, and the thing that jumps out at me is that these allegations of sexual harassment by Carl DeMaio, they're not new. Ben Hueso brought them up a year ago, but they seem to play to the fears of the public about gay men, and it's a pretty easy charge to make without any real substantiation, and I wonder how that plays politically.
Yeah, Tony, elaborate on what Eric's referring to here. For our audience may not be aware, Ben Hueso, of course, was a city councilman at the time, alongside Carl DeMaio.
Hueso told a freelance reporter, Rex Dalton, an old colleague of ours, that in 2009 he had seen on more than one occasion Carl DeMaio was on the council at that time, masturbating in a public bathroom there at City Hall.
It's a semi-public bath. It's behind the council chambers. The staffers use it as a little coat pad.
And Hueso promptly took that statement back and then said, I didn't think that I was on the record. But he won't confirm it now when people go back to him and
Although
ask
there
about
are at least one other council, there are other council members who say, I never knew anything about this, but I know at least one who said, well, I didn't see it. I remember Hueso talking about it almost immediately.
But Hueso's not talking about it now.
Hueso's not talking about it.
You mentioned it in your story, and CNN did as well.
As for that, I guess I take a different view, and that is that these allegations don't have the same resonance with the voters if it was a woman making an allegation against a man, a la Bob Filner. I just have a feeling that they don't resonate with the public as much.
Do you think that it plays politically? Do you think that there's political damage from the allegation?
Well, certainly there's no advantage. But I don't think there's major advantage. I think when all is said and done, this thing is going to be won or lost by either Carl DeMaio and Scott Peters, and nobody around this table gives a darn which one of them wins, right? I think it's going to be won based on who has the best ground game. That is to say, who knows where their voters are and who can get them to the polls, or get them to vote early. And there's a lot of early voting in that district. Carl is awfully good at that kind of thing. He did very well in that district when he ran for mayor. He lost for mayor, but he did well in that part of the city in the 52nd Congressional. Peters has won an election there, and so they both, in theory, should have good ground game. So this is going to be two professionals slugging it out, two campaign professionals slugging it out.
You should say that this is unfolding as ballots are already out. So people are voting, could have already voted before
by mail,
anything came out.
Claire, a couple of things. Tony alluded to this. Just tell us where this district is so the audience understands where we're talking about.
It runs up from Coronado up the coast through Mission Bay, Pacific Beach, then into Poway, Rancho Bernardo, kind of the wealthier areas.
The other thing I want to touch on, which would be a crime, certainly is a crime, though the police statement said when they declined to do anything about charges that it was an alleged burglary. But tell us about the other aspect of this that the police and prosecutor were investigating.
So there was this break-in at the campaign headquarters end of May, right before the primary. At the time, DeMaio, on radio interviews and his spokesman, said nothing was stolen, although then I think it was 10 News reported that some gas cards, like debit cards used to buy gas, were stolen. But DeMaio, doing interviews after the fact, said nothing was stolen. Then recently he gave an interview that said, well, we didn't reveal this at the time, but actually this campaign playbook was stolen and delivered somehow, we don't know how, to the Scott Peters campaign. DeMaio confronted Scott Peters about it on a Politically Speaking episode on NBC, and Scott Peters said, we had it for 24 hours. I never looked at it. My campaign manager looked at it enough to know what it was and then promptly turned it over to the police because it was part of this investigation about the burglary. So a whole other strange wrinkle we don't really understand. A lot of people are skeptical that this playbook even exists. In a campaign in 2014, why are you printing out all of your strategy, putting it in a binder, and then leaving it in the office overnight?
It seems to be pretty easy to figure for months what Carl's campaign is going to be, just like it was pretty easy to figure what Scott's campaign is going to be. So, yeah, I'm with you. I don't see that there would be a lot of nuclear secrets in a document if it exists.
All right, let's talk about those campaigns a little bit. These candidates, aside from everything we've been touching on, let's talk about the candidates themselves. Claire, you had done a story some time back about a questionnaire that they both candidates filled out, both camps filled out extensively, and the surprise there was they didn't differ a whole lot on many of the key issues, right?
Right. I mean, this whole election is a battle for the independents, the people in the middle, so both men are trying to be as moderate as possible.
There's roughly an even split, right? Democrats,
yes.
Republicans, and independents, roughly a third of each, right? Yeah.
Right. So, on questions of same-sex marriage, obviously both support it. A woman's right to an abortion, both support that. Climate change, Peter says, yes, it's real, yes, it's caused by humans. DeMaio says, yes, it's real, and we should continue to study whether humans have an impact on it or something like that, I believe was his wording. So not a lot that they differ on.
And foreign policy, Peter says he supports the president and what he's doing in Iraq and Syria, but doesn't want to commit himself to ground troops. Carl says he's not so sure that the president has really made the case. That's real close stuff. Mm-hmm. If you believe what, for example, they both filled out for the Union Tribune's issues piece last week, and there isn't much difference, if you believe that.
Right.
Carl is a work in progress, I think we have to admit. And so it's hard to know. He's evolving, and he, if he is elected, would go back there and confront issues that, other than potholes and pensions that he confronted at City Hall. And we really don't know where he will come down. Scott is, we know where, he's been there for almost 2 years now. And I think we know where he is. Right. Yeah, Sierra Club, Planned Parenthood, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, oddly enough. Right. Carl is more Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, a Latino political association, and a small business consortium. What's that mean when they go to Washington? We'll see.
But this race is swimming in money, right? Oh. And outside money. I have kids that are 10 and 7, and they know. They turned to me the other day when I was watching a football game. They said, "Dad, is that guy a bad guy?"
Because they're seeing the ads along with everybody else.
Yeah, and it's having an impact on them, and they're responding to that. And I'm thinking, how you have to be living in a bunker not to know.
More than $10 million from both the candidates and the outside groups, including the party, and then including some PACs, political action committees. Basically, it boils down to the Peters people and the Peters supporters saying Carl's a Tea Partyite. Don't believe him. He's a Tea Partyite. Carl says no, and the DeMaio people and their supporters say Scott Peters is a rich man and he's not really got our backs. He's for himself. He's worth $44 million or $100 million, depending on what figure you take. Peters says, among other things, that's nonsense, and also that money came from his wife in recent years. He didn't marry money, and that it doesn't make any difference how much money you have in the bank. So you've got each side trying to denigrate, demonize the other, each side saying the other guy's getting it totally wrong and is slamming me.
It's interesting. It's interesting to me that, I mean, all of this money has come in. The House isn't even in play. You know, it's not like the House.
This seat isn't going to make, it's not going to swing the House.
So it's a big deal for San Diego, and I think, you know, the Democrats are trying to establish ownership of the seat because Peters was only elected in 2012, but it's not going to make a difference one way or the other in Congress.
No,
actually.
And if Carl is elected, the campaign by the Democrats to take him out in 2 years when it's a presidential year, higher turnout, more Democrats, that will begin the day after the election.
Right.
Now the consultants say, or the analysts say, this may be the only seat in the country that a Republican has a chance to take away from a Democrat in the House. To that extent, it's one of these proxy fights, right? We're really getting ready for that fight in 2016. Let's fight it out here in the 52nd Congressional District in San Diego.
Much has been made also that Carl DeMaio would be the first openly gay Republican in Congress as well, which elevates it somewhat to a national story. We should note that Todd Bosnich, who we were talking about earlier, is also an openly gay man in this conflict they've had here over this sexual harassment. I want to touch, we've got a couple of seconds left in this segment. I wanted to get back to that for a moment. It's a difficult story for the media to report. I mean, this stuff had been swirling and bubbling up, kind of had to reach a tipping point before a lot of folks were going to do major, serious pieces on this because of the nature of these allegations. And as you said earlier, this tight, private, he said conversation.
Yeah, it's real smarmy stuff, if one believes it. And the question is, what relationship does this kind of personal conduct, even if it was done in a campaign office, what does it have to do with how you will function as a member of the House of Representatives? On the other hand, people will say character matters, and people will also say, hey, how about that set of allegations that Ben Wayso made? What does that say about Carl? And of course, we're living in the post-Filner age.
And I should say that story got no traction at all back then.
Indeed. Did we all cover for Filner for years?
Right, and that's the other question. What do you cover for? I mean, what do you not go on the other side? You're really caught in the middle on these stories.
Well, now what we're seeing is this guy, Todd Bosnich, is leaking out, he says, emails that were sent by DeMaio throughout the campaign that make DeMaio look pretty bad. And so now DeMaio is having to answer or not answer whether these emails are real, whether he actually sent them. And so the media is kind of following this.
Well, we've got to wrap it up there. We've only got about 10 days till the election, but I'm sure we may have not have heard the last of this. That may be the one safe thing we can say. Well, as California suffers through a third year of drought, voters are being asked to vote on a $7.5 billion water bond, which will fund all kinds of projects. It's less than what was originally proposed, and although it has its critics, it also seems to have strong bipartisan support and the backing of Governor Brown. So, Eric, besides rainfall, what do we need in this state, and what are some of the details in this water bond?
Well, I think the thing you have to remember about the water bond is that it is as old as the drought, in essence. It was first conceived of back in 2010. Lawmakers first bandied about. They were looking at a $12 billion package, big water projects, specific water projects. Got through the legislature with 2/3 support. And then lawmakers sat back and looked at it and said, you know, I don't think there's any way we can bring this in front of the voters and have the voters pass it. So they kind of put it on the shelf for a year. They tried again the next year, put together another package, got it through the legislature, and then looked at it again and said, you know, I'm not sure this is going to happen. And then that's year 2 of the drought, by the way. So here we are 4 years in to the worst drought that California's had in recent memory. And the water bond is back up, but it's a pared-down version. There was a lot of political working to make sure that it was palatable to all the lawmakers. It got all but 2 votes in the Assembly when it was voted on, unanimous votes in the Senate. And they wanted a package that was smaller, that made fiscal sense in light of the state's financial position, but would be acceptable to a lot of different people for a lot of different reasons, and that's what they got. But
well, give us the high points. What are some of the big things, big ticket items in there?
What you get is you get a general overview of something to do with water. You don't have specific projects.
And that was deliberate, right?
Yeah, that was deliberate. What the writers of the bond said was, we want to have a bond. We're not going to decide ahead of time what the projects are going to be. We want to have a thorough airing of those projects bit by bit so they'll be able to apply to it. So we'll have general. $2.7 billion, probably the most controversial aspect, $2.7 billion for new water storage in the state.
Dams.
That could be dams. But if you talk to the NRDC says, oh, that could be underwater storage too. We don't really know.
Is
National Resources Defense Council.
And that's what's controversial about it, is what the water storage will look like?
Well, I think what makes the water storage controversial is that it's such a small percentage of the water source in California. Our biggest reservoir sits up in the Sierras, and that's shrinking. It's the snowpack. We've had trouble with that the last 4 years. We're in the midst of a record-punishing drought. To build a small reservoir where actual water is stored is such a small percentage in terms of what the state needs. So the opponents argue that this really doesn't do anything to affect our current water situation.
Let me use the two nastiest words in waterdom. Peripheral canal, that decades-old proposal to loop around the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta from the north to bring their water down to the south.
I don't think it's any coincidence that this is a Sacramento-born piece of legislation.
Northern California.
And there is a lot of opposition from the folks who have interest in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta, folks who've been fighting for that.
So we're gonna a couple of clips here that are gonna explain a little bit on both sides. First is from Dennis Cushman of the San Diego County Water Authority, who's in favor of this bond.
There'll be a catalyst to get projects going sooner and faster, and we need those projects going right now to deal not only with our long-term water supply needs as a region here in San Diego, as in California, but also to make our region and state more resilient to droughts.
All right, but environmentalists, and we're going to hear a clip here from Marco Gonzalez, environmentalist attorney, absolutely disagree with that perspective.
It doesn't give us what we need down here in San Diego at the end of the pipe in terms of long-term water supply benefits.
What else is environments like Gonzalez objecting to?
Well, what he's concerned about is there is a portion of the water bond that is the money is to be parsed out in a geographical region. And it could mean a couple of $100 million for San Diego projects. But what he's saying is that we have billion-dollar problems. We need to find, stable, secure sources of drinking water for this urban region. And he says it really doesn't do anything to address that beyond a few demonstration projects. That's his concern. The Water Authority officials who were intimately involved in crafting this proposal in the legislature, they worked with Tony Atkins on the Hill, in the Capitol for that as well. They're saying, look, I don't think they're arguing that this is the be-all, end-all of water bonds and it's going to fix all the state's water projects, but they're saying it's a Kickstarter. It's going to allow us to get certain projects started that will actually have an impact down the road.
Okay. Now, the governor, of course, is pushing this, and it's kind of, since he's so far ahead in his own race for re-election here, this has kind of become his campaign. Let's hear a little bit from an ad from Governor Brown here.
It's been over 50 years since we built the state water project that's been the backbone of California. To stay strong, we need a reliable water supply and a stable budget. That's why there's almost unanimous support for Propositions 1 and 2. Prop 1 saves water, so we're prepared for drought. Prop 2 saves money in a rainy day fund, so we're prepared for economic downturns. Save water, save money. Vote yes on 1 and 2.
Of course, the 50-year reference, he's referring to his dad, Pat Brown, who was a governor of California when the state water project went through. I think he has some vision that he's going to, in some way, continue that and have that be part of his,
the Brown legacy,
his legacy when he leaves office in the next 4 years. And he's hinted that in his next term, that's going to be a big focus of his administration.
Dog on the bone, once he is reelected, might peripheral canal, or whatever they're going to call it, reappear?
I think that becomes much more politically palatable for him. He doesn't have to worry about being reelected. He can stand up and he can take the heat politically because he'll get it. There are a lot of people who don't like that idea. They think it's a lot of money, a lot of the state's money to funnel drinking water to Southern California. and bypassing all the people who rely on the Delta for their livelihood.
The governor there referenced the other prop that's kind of related to this. Briefly tell us what that's about.
Yeah, Prop 2 is California's rainy day fund, and essentially what Proposition 2 does, it's part of what the governor is kind of looking at as his fiscal reform, a chance to what he sees as a way to build the state's fiscal health. It sets aside a certain amount of money every year to pay down California's $300 billion debt bill. It also raises the cap on the rainy day fund that the state has from $8 to about $11 billion, and it allows the state to be a little bit more nimble.
All right, a few seconds left. Is this going to pass the water bond?
Yes.
Polls say it will. Polls say 56%.
They look like they're in favor.
The last poll had about 56% support.
The peripheral canal would have set north versus south. Yeah. Without it, it's a wonky issue.
It's hard to oppose something that doesn't really exist.
All right, we're going to have to wrap it right there. That does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Claire Trageser of KPBS News, Tony Perry of the Los Angeles Times, and Eric Anderson, also of KPBS News. A reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.